Go West, young man. In the mid-19th century, that phrase appeared again and again in American newspapers. It wasn't motivational, it was logistical. The country wanted the frontier settled, and the young men were told, almost ordered, to leave behind the lives they knew and push towards the unknown. But something else was happening beneath that instruction. Men weren't just moving west, they were abandoning one identity and building another. The clerk became a rancher, the farmhand became a homesteader. Historians talk about the physical expansion of the country. Psychologists will call it something different today: identity disruption. Change the landscape, and the mind is forced to change with it. Behavior adapts, new roles form, identity updates to match the demands of survival. Millions of individual reinventions created a national myth: the idea that you can become someone else if you're willing to leave behind who you were. And that's where Don Draper lives, not as a television character, but as the clearest expression of the American reinvention myth ever written. Before any of this makes sense, you have to understand one thing about Don Draper. He wasn't born Don Draper at all. His real name was Dick Whitman. He grew up in blinding poverty on a farm during the Depression, the kind of childhood where every day was shaped by neglect, instability, and a constant sense that he didn't belong anywhere. Nothing in his early life hinted at success. If anything, his beginnings made it almost impossible. The world had already decided who Dick Whitman was allowed to become, and it wasn't much. Then came the Korean War, and with it, a moment that changed everything. During an explosion on the battlefield, the officer Dick served under, a man named Don Draper, was killed. The blast left the body burned beyond recognition, only his dog tags remained. And in that moment, Dick Whitman made a choice. He switched the dog tags. He claimed the dead man's identity as his own. Not out of ambition, not because he had some grand plan, because it was the only chance he would ever have to walk away from a life that felt like a trap. Dick Whitman didn't drift into becoming Don Draper. He stepped into the identity of Don Draper because it was the only way to survive the life he was born into. In season 1, when his half-brother Adam finds him in New York and calls him Dick, Don says quietly,
"That's not me."
That line isn't poetic, it's literal. The man called Don Draper exists because Dick Whitman couldn't. But the name didn't give him a future, it only removed his old one. A new identity doesn't deliver opportunity, it only removes the barrier that made opportunity impossible. When Don first walks into Sterling Cooper, nothing's guaranteed. He's not destined, he's not chosen, he's not even sure he belongs. He's a man who studies harder, listens closer, and performs better because the consequence of failure is unthinkable. There's no life for Dick Whitman to fall back into. In the pilot, Don pitches Lucky Strike by reframing cigarettes as, "It's toasted." That moment isn't confidence, it's survival instinct wrapped in practiced charisma. Psychologists call this narrative authorship, the belief that you can rewrite your story from scratch. Don is the extreme case. His identity isn't just a mask, it's a fortress designed to keep the past out. But that's where the real tragedy begins.
Is that you? Dick? Is that your name?
People change their names, Bets. You did.
I did. I took your name. And so did this Anna woman, whoever she is.
I can explain.
I know you can. You're a very, very gifted storyteller.
Self-reinvention can change your circumstances, but it can't change your emotional wiring. And here's where Don Draper becomes more than a character. He's a reminder of something people forget in an age where the word trauma gets tossed around for attention, trends, and hashtags. The people who have suffered the deepest wounds aren't the ones broadcasting it. They're the ones who learned early that showing hurt is dangerous, so they hide it so well that no one on the outside suspects how much they're carrying. And that's Don. The suits, the confidence, the charm, the control, none of that is who he is. It's who he learned to be to survive. Trauma isn't always loud. It isn't always visible. Sometimes it looks like competence. Sometimes it looks like ambition. Sometimes it looks like a man who can walk into any room and dominate it while having no real sense of himself behind the performance. Dick Whitman became Don Draper because the old identity was too painful to live in. But the pain didn't disappear when the name did. It just went underground, shaping everything he touched. The drinking, the affairs, the compulsive urge to run the moment someone gets close. The constant need to fill an emptiness that no one else can see. Those aren't random flaws. They're patterns of someone who has never learned safety, connection, or permanence. Mad Men never sensationalizes this. It never turns Don into a victim. Instead, it shows what real trauma looks like in adulthood. A life built with precision on top of wounds that no one else can see. The toxic effects on those who love you. And how trauma buried resurfaces and multiplies into everyone you touch. Your wife, your children. So yes, Don Draper's a professional success. He's brilliant, desirable, and envied. But beneath that, he's still carrying the weight of a childhood that never let him learn what it feels like to be whole. And no amount of brilliant copywriting can heal that. The Hershey monologue makes this obvious. Don begins with a fantasy about his childhood, something safe and marketable. But when the truth surfaces, only for a split second, you see how painful it is for him to let that mask fall.
Because the woman who was forced to raise me would look at me every day like she'd hoped I would disappear. Closest I got to feeling wanted was from a girl who made me go through her John's pockets while they screwed. If I collected more than $1, she'd buy me a Hershey bar. And I would eat it alone in my room with great ceremony. Feeling like a normal kid.
Just for a moment, Don Draper ceased to exist, and Dick Whitman stands in his place, the boy whose wounds were never healed by the name he stole. The Hershey confession isn't powerful because Don finally tells the truth. It's powerful because you can see what the truth does to him. For a moment, the entire identity he built, the charm, the certainty, the myth of Don Draper, collapses under the weight of a story he spent his whole life avoiding. And once that mask slips, you understand something the show has been saying quietly from the beginning. Don Draper's brilliance and Don Draper's damage come from the same source. The same instincts that make him magnetic in a boardroom are the instincts he developed to survive a childhood no one else in the room could imagine. He can sell anything because he had to. He can read people because it kept him safe. He can disappear into fantasy because reality was never something he wanted to stay in for long. That's why Don is so tragic. Not because he's a fraud, but because he's exactly who he had to become. He built a life so polished that even he sometimes believes it. But it's a structure balanced on a fault line. The higher he climbs, the shakier it gets. Mad Men never punishes Don for stealing a name. It shows something harder, that reinvention has a cost. The world will reward the man you create, but you still have to live with the man you were. Reinvention can change your opportunities. It cannot change the parts of you that were shaped before you had any say in the matter. Don Draper shows us that identity is flexible, but trauma is stubborn. You can run far enough to build a new life, but you can't run far enough to outrun yourself. And that's what makes Don Draper unforgettable. Not his success, not his charisma, not the suits or the pitches, but the quiet truth underneath. A man can become someone else, but he always takes his scars with him.